May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Puba of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and free from economic hardship and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Today we're going to have some more pieces from a work in progress, Tassajara Stories, the early years with Shunryu Suzuki. So we're going to get right into that after our pause to meditate. So when you hear the bell, hit pause if you want, and meditate if you want, or whatever for as long as you want. And when you're through, hit unpause, and we'll be waiting there to hit the bell to end the meditation, or whatever. Oh, it's starting to rain. So we might have a little rain here. This is rainy season. But that would just add to the ambiance. And if it gets too hard and hits down, there's a metal roof outside here, man. That really gets going. If it gets too hard, I can use a little noise reduction on it. But it might not. It might just be a gutter miss, which is what they say here for like sprinkling. But rainy season tends to have more than just gutter miss. So here we go. The vague. I learned not to try to pin down a definition of what we were doing there. Whatever we said, practicing Zen, waking up to reality, just sitting, just walking, just etc., after a while, it was stale, and the only position that didn't get stale was keeping quiet. Halpern and I weren't always practicing silence, though, and would joke about how the essence of the way of Zen at Zen Center was the vague. He walked into the dining room where I was sweeping the floor and asked what I was doing. "I'm sweeping the floor," I said. "On a superficial level," he replied, "but what you are really doing is practicing the vague." Stuff like that. He'd read a lot about Buddhism and was always quoting sutras and stories about Buddha's time. I would read a tiny bit. I was in the little library between the Zendo and the kitchen, slowly going over a page of Shantideva's 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, when Bob walked up the stairs and said, "What are you doing?" I said I knew what he expected me to answer, but that I was really just trying to catch up with him, but that I read so slowly that every day I fell further behind. There was a guest sitting at a table who asked if we might explain something. He said he was a statistics teacher at a local college, and so to him, correct data is important. He'd been reading from the collection of typed-up transcripts of Suzuki lectures, and he came to one where Suzuki said, and he read, Dogen Senshi says, Zazen practice is like going through the mist. If you go through the mist, your robes will be wet. Even though you don't notice it, your robe will be naturally wet. When you go out in a sudden shower, even though you feel your robe is wet, it doesn't get through your robe. But when you get wet in the mist, even though you don't feel it, the moisture will penetrate into your body. That is how we should practice Zazen. The guest said he disagreed, that the more rain there was, the wetter you'd get, and you could walk in a mist without getting you all wet. I said, yeah, I thought the same thing, but it didn't matter. It's just a poetic way of saying that if we apply ourselves diligently and continually, that we will naturally, slowly reap the benefits of our efforts without noticing it. We understand the deep meaning, Bob said in a declaratory tone, because we practice the vague. Oh, no, Bob, I said, burying my head in my hands. I didn't like to play with innocent people the way Bob did. But maybe it's a little sadistic of me that I also loved it when people would come up to me frustrated, trying to figure out what Zazen and practice were. A Stanford student who was a guest student for a week said she'd gone to a Zazen instruction, which happened at 4 p.m. every day in the Zendo, but all she'd been told was the correct way to enter, arrange the cushion, bow, turn around clockwise, bow, sit, turn around facing the wall, and follow the breath. I said, that sounds like one of my Zazen instructions, and she said, yes, it was. I told her, too bad Loring's not here because he gives long ones and explains a lot about the basics of Buddhism. She asked, what are the basics? I said, it depends on who you talk to. Some will go back to the first, to the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Three Marks of Existence, and so forth. She said, okay, how about you just tell me the 3 marks of existence? Let me see, I said, looking up. Oh, yeah. Impermanence, no self, and suffering. Suffering? Right, as in, I can't get no satisfaction. Well, I don't like that. So, we sit Zazen and practice. For what? What makes you satisfied? Well, I don't know if it's that cut and dry, but from what I gather from our dear founder, Suzuki Roshi, and other teachers and talking to others on the path and reading, we can wake up from this. Wake up to what? Nirvana? Maybe so. Suzuki called it big mind a lot. I told her he thought the best Zazen instruction, at least the first time, was no Zazen instruction. I suggested people go sit a couple of times before knowing anything about it or what to do. Just do what others do and see what happens. Mel Weitzman said, I asked Suzuki Roshi when I was ordained, what should I do? He said, oh, I don't know. I asked Katagiri the same, and he said, I don't know. I knew I had to find out something, but they weren't going to tell me anything, so I just ended up imitating. So I'd watch Suzuki Roshi very closely and do everything just the way he did it, which is how he was teaching me. I don't know if my experience is different from other priests' experience because, in a way, I was an experiment of a priest who was actually there at Zen Center being taught by Suzuki Roshi, who wasn't teaching anything except that I should keep my eyes and ears open and learn from what he was doing. And he told me one way of teaching in our lineage is to imitate the teacher. It's called putting your feet in the footsteps of the teacher. He indicated to me that that was how he was teaching me. He wouldn't tell me much, and he expected that I would just follow what he was doing, and that's what I did. What Mel said there reminds me of the kanji, the character for to study or learn in Japanese and Chinese. It's got wings. The way I heard it, that stands for how a baby bird learns to fly, by imitating its mother. Birds. If you go to Tassajara in the summer, you may notice the Steller's jays, closely related to blue jays. We call them blue jays. Some of us thought that they're not a nice bird. They run off the songbirds and mainly squawk instead of sing. Because of these aggressive birds, it's not wise in the summer to eat outside anywhere near the center of Tassajara, which is where they tend to congregate, perched on branches around the courtyard, waiting for a careless student or guest. I often heard guests complain their lunch had been vandalized. I've seen the jays swoop down and snatch an apple slice out of someone's hand. Edward Brown about had a fit when one hit a sandwich he was eating, got off with some of it, the rest on the ground. Flies aren't the only reason students now eat in a screened-in area in the summer. We used to talk about how to get rid of the jays. A farmer from Greenfield said the thing to do is when they first show up in the spring, shoot one and the rest will fly off and not return. We couldn't do that, though some of us would have if allowed. So people have learned to live with them and in some cases appreciate them. When we first got to Tassajara in 1967, the jays weren't dominant. Pigeons were. About 20 of them lived there. That was around the time Herb Caen dubbed them rats with wings in his famous daily column in the San Francisco Chronicle. Former Tassajara owner Bob Beck said the pigeons were used by previous owners to communicate with the outside world when the road was blocked. They weren't aggressive in the same way as jays, but they weren't afraid of us. They'd gather around our feet on the long-gone old back deck and eat all the cat food and anything down there. We couldn't leave things out unattended, but they wouldn't hop up on a picnic table rudely while we were sitting at it. So we ate outside then without trepidation. To me, they exhibited a sort of creepy greediness. I found them to be pests when I was running the dining room and decided to get rid of them. I don't think I had to ask anyone due to their general popularity, but I tended to share anything on my mind and always had a million ideas of what should be done. So even if I did tell an officer, they probably just nodded, hoping I'd go away and not have another bright idea. So one morning, after guest breakfast was over and the dining room all clean, I put out a jumbo cardboard box propped up with a stick, holding a string tied to it, a plate of dried cat food inside, and waited. Not long. They were really stupid. One by one, caught them all and put them in other large boxes, and before time to set up guest lunch, the task was done. After guest lunch cleanup, loaded the boxes with all of them in it in the back of the shopping truck and drove them out to Carmel Valley. They got back before I did. Later in the summer, I was to drive the 6-ton flatbed 4 hours to Dos Palos, to Cota Brothers Farm, to get several tons of organic brown rice, some white, and some bags of gluten rice for baking and making mochi. I brought some passengers with me. The pigeons, recaught and boxed gingerly for the trip. Dos Palos is between I-5 and 99 north of Fresno, and the road there through Los Banos has a famous windy stretch that was really acting up, making me fear a Volkswagen bus ahead would blow over. Big box trucks do that there. There are billboard-size warning signs. At the point that I was furthest away from Tassajara, I pulled over, slid the back door up, brought the boxes down, and released the pigeons into a new wind-blown realm. I was about 140 road miles from Tassajara, and 73 as the pigeon flies. We never saw them again. In the Zen in America section of Sunseed, filmed at Tassajara in the summer of 1970, Suzuki said, "If we try to listen to something wonderful," laughs, "it means to ignore the bird which we are listening to now." You know, when you think Buddha said something wonderful and I must find out what he meant, then your mind is directed to Buddha's words, pointing up with his right hand. So you don't hear the birds pointing left with his left hand. And birds are chirping loudly over there. So always we sacrifice various actual reality because we stick to something. And we stick to something which looks very good, he laughs. But that is not so good. If we have this kind of attitude when we listen to words or teaching even, we lose our life. And maybe our whole life will be sacrificed because of some special teaching. So I always rather enjoy, our life right now without sacrificing. When I heard that, I thought I should probably be more accepting of the birds at hand. Diane. There were always some young, handsome, clean, shaved-headed guys who liked to work shirtless and sweating in the hot summer sun. There were those who thought it inappropriate attire for samu, the Zen monastic word for work. Samu was another, at least potential form of zazen. There was already an obvious shirt requirement for the zendo, no shirt, no sit, no service, which included not to enter with footwear, shorts, or jewelry. During samu, Japanese monks were samue, black work outfits with fitted yet still baggy sleeves and pants. The shirtless issue was brought up in one of our occasional open meetings in the dining room. It was another collision of subcultures, as when student mixed bathing had been abruptly, though gently, put to rest by Suzuki early on. The group meetings gave students the impression their opinions mattered, though decisions were made entirely by the officers, board, Richard Baker, the Abbott, in ascending order. Paul said that meetings were just to let us feel included for a while. On whether there should be a shirt rule, people spoke. We're not Japanese. We're Americans. Yes, but we are not a commune, but a monastery. We have rules and form and guests. A certain level of decorum is called for. Do we want to continue the uptight American puritanical shaming of the body? It's not a matter of shame, but of modesty, form, and thoughtfulness. A young woman named Diane expressed an opinion that surely did more than anything to expedite the decision. If men can go shirtless, then why not women? The next day, Diane went to work meeting in denim overalls with no shirt underneath, so that her ample breasts were visible from the sides. She was asked by the director to please wear something under the overalls. She said no, that next she'd go shirtless like some of the men. Around that time, a group of Japanese Zen priests visited Tassajara. Mel, the head monk, showed them around. They came upon and observed some students working in the garden. One of them was Diane. She was squatting and digging with a trowel. One of her ample breasts was hanging out the side of her overalls. Later that day, Mel asked to speak to her. The rule that all must wear shirts was announced the next morning at work meeting. Diane added a considerate apology to the men, without any regret. Early in 1968, Director Peter had told me there was someone who might be arriving any time and asked if I could see she got lunch and settled in. I was there when she stepped out of the car that had brought her, and her long hair, backpack, curious but tired. I liked everyone, but right away I had a special liking for her. Gave her a choice of food or a hot bath first. She said she'd just hitchhiked from L.A. and was famished, but would love a bath first. She was surprised there was a woman's side and asked why. Soon it was Tassajara bread, rich vegetable soup, and salad from our garden. She'd already fallen in love with the place. She wasn't talking much then, but I gathered a little from her that day and through the years. Diane had demonstrated and been arrested at the massive April 1968 protest against the war in Vietnam at the Human Circle around the Pentagon, and was one of the holdout fasters who'd been force-fed. She lived and worked at the Fellowship of Reconciliation in Nyack, New York, and was a friend of Catholic peace activist Jim Forrest, who ran it. She had spent time with Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who was staying in Forrest's apartment in Manhattan, hiding out, she said, I guess due to his outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War. Diane got her first inkling of Zen on her way west when she heard a talk by the humorous and light-hearted Paul Reps of Zenflesh, Zenbones fame in Colorado. She'd been in Los Angeles working at a college in the art department and was having a difficult time emotionally, was extremely confused about how to interact with society and how to communicate with people. Having a mental breakdown, as she called it. She phoned Forrest, who told her to go where Thich Nhat Hanh and he had visited the year before, to call his friend Peter and tell him that you're a friend of ours and that you need a place to stay for a while and that you'll work and that you have a sleeping bag. Thich Nhat Hanh was not yet a famous Zen teacher. I'd had the honor of meeting and serving Forrest and him the previous summer when they visited Tassajara. I'd first heard of him from Tassajara's most generous doctor, Bill Winter, in Monterey. Behind his desk in his doctor's office, Winter had a row of copies to give away of Nhat Hanh's Lotus in a Sea of Fire, published in 1967 about the seemingly endless and brutal war in Vietnam. Diane had slept by a fruit stand the night before in Carmel Valley, been awakened by police with flashlights, hitched to Jamesburg, walked a good deal of the road before getting a ride. On the phone, Peter had asked her if she'd ever sat zazen. She said she didn't know what that was and was having trouble talking and answering questions, just wanted a quiet place where she could work. That wouldn't have succeeded with most people, but I guess the Forrest connection, Peter's kind heart, and Diane's sweet voice did it. After lunch, she and I went on a walk downstream past the Narrows, where few venture. Took a very nice nap together on a large flat rock. The schedule of early and late zazen services and hours of work was too much for some people, but she slid right into it. It was agreed she'd stay a week, then to Berkeley to get settled. Got a letter from her with fanciful creatures drawn in the margins. She said the silence at Tassajara, where she didn't have to use many words, had healed her greatly. I had a few days off from the guest dining room coming, so I went to see her. Took her to the Berkeley Zen Center for early morning zazen. We stayed for breakfast. Introduced her to Mel Weitzman, who was in charge. She met Richard and Cam Burak. After that, they gave her rides to zazen and with Mel to San Francisco to Suzuki's lectures. She loved the feeling she got watching and listening to Suzuki, and after a few lectures, got to where she could understand what he was saying, and liked that too. 9 months later, May 1969, I was most pleased she was back at Tassajara as a student and part-time troublemaker. Diane was one of the people who worked quite a bit with Suzuki in his garden. Except for Audrey Walter, all the others I can think of who did stonework with him were males. The stones in the garden fit together differently from those in walls. Diane said she'd talked to the stones. She couldn't believe that little man moved by himself. Stone, she was sure he wouldn't be able to. One day, while on a break after guest lunch, I walked by Suzuki and Diane working in his garden. He called me over and asked if I could bring a few wheelbarrow loads of dirt. Fine with me. I didn't have a knack with these stones or plants, but loved shoveling and pushing the wheelbarrow. Diane had a rhythm and feeling with him in work that I admired. Diane followed Suzuki's lead, so it was clear to him where the stone should face and how they and the surrounding plants should be in his garden. They were all together there, having a good, wordless time. The Abbott's cabin. On a break from the dining room, I sneaked into Suzuki's little cabin. He was in the city. There is still firewood from colder days, neatly stacked by the cast iron stove, newspaper and kindling in a cardboard box, a hatchet lying on the fire brick, a pleasing mix of odor from the split oak and ashes, a hint of the heavenly aroma from the sachet of herbs Oksan puts with his robes, the lingering influence of a particular brand of temple incense, all combined to create the characteristic fragrance of that room. I wondered what character is that little statue on the altar table. Plenty of folks here can tell me. I lit the candle and picked one green stick of incense. I learned from him how to light it with the candle flame. Lift and pull it straight down quickly to kill the flame. Hold it with 6 fingers held high. Sink it straight vertically into the ash pot. Subtle, not like some common pungent, sweet, overwhelming varieties. 2 short tables rest on the edge of the 6 tatami. One I'd inexpertly made in the first spring from cutting up a hollow core door with Paul Disco's unobtrusive guidance. I'd sawed the corners off to hide the poor meeting of edge trim pieces, smoothed it all down. I sniffed it, could still barely smell the linseed oil, stood up, had to pee. His bedding is folded up and stored on a high shelf in the narrow back room with its 40-year-old toilet and sink between the stacked cardboard boxes and scrolls, waiting for their turn to be opened and hung to the side of the altar. Sheetrock painted off-white years ago is inset between the dense old-growth redwood posts. 2x4 window sills wrap 3 walls. Winter plastic removed. A breeze wafts in through the screens. In the corner, an indigo furoshiki cloth covers a tray with a ceramic teapot and mongrel mix of cups, a can with sencha green tea, and a stack of institutional paper napkins cut in 2 with scissors. Books in Japanese and English on shelves. I picked one, Born in Tibet, by Chogyam Trungpa. Sat on a zabuton to read. In a couple of minutes, lay down to read. Put the book down. Fell asleep. This has been another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Dogga Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.